Mysterious Warriors, Myths and Truth About Kamikazes. Under the cover of a smoke-shrouded autumn sky, on October 19, 1944, on the uninhabited island of Luzon, the Imperial Japanese Army's main airbase in the Philippines, Vice Admiral Takehiko Onishi presided over a fateful meeting that would change the course of the Pacific War. In a dilapidated hangar lit by flickering kerosene lamps, the commanders of Eagle fighter squadrons gathered, their faces darkened by the gravity of the impending battle. Onishi, a man of courage and determination, stood before them, his gaze filled with both determination and despair. 2 days as Vice Admiral had been enough for Onishi to realize the unreality of the task at hand. The 1st Air Fleet, which he commanded, was lavishly named after only 3 dozen battered Zeros and a handful of these. Meanwhile, to defend the Philippines from American invasion, a colossal Japanese fleet stood at the ready, with the superlancers Yamato and Musashi towering imposingly. Onishi's mission to cover the fleet from the air seemed impossible, given the enemy's vast air superiority. Onishi, the vice admiral of the fleet, sternly addressed his captains. "The situation is dire. Our fleet is facing imminent disaster. American aircraft carriers equipped with torpedo carriers and dive bombers will soon turn our best ships into a blazing inferno." Fighters, Onishi believed, could not effectively sink aircraft carriers, even with bombs aboard. "Our Zero fighters have no bombing sights and the pilots lack the necessary skills," he lamented. There was silence in the offices. Vice Admiral looked around his subordinates, waiting for suggestions, but alas, there were none. Suddenly, like lightning, Onishi was struck by a terrifying plan. "There is one way, albeit a deadly one," he squeezed out. "Fighters with bombs attached to them can ram the enemy ships." The captains, stunned by this suggestion, hardly accepted it as the only possible outcome. Thus was born the Divine Wind Special Attack Squadron, known as the Kamikaze Tokubetsu Kogekita, an example of self-sacrifice as a tactic. Kamikazes, the legendary Japanese suicide pilots, became a symbol of World War II desperation and bravery. However, behind this infamous term lies a much more complex and subtle reality. Over time, the term kamikaze has been transformed into a figure of speech encompassing not only suicide bombers, but also those who recklessly disregard their own safety. However, the word originally referred to a special squad of Japanese fighter pilots who deliberately went to their deaths in the name of their country during World War II. The belligerent nature of the conflict motivated both sides to brave action and sacrifice. Military units and commanders sacrificed the lives of their soldiers, even if the chances of survival were minimal. Nevertheless, the kamikazes remain a unique case because they were a specialized unit of suicide bombers, specially trained and equipped to carry out their fateful missions. Military strategists developed specific tactics for them, and engineers perfected weaponry for their deadly attacks. This gave their actions a tinge of ruthless premeditation unavailable to other participants in the conflict. Inspired by Vice Admiral Onishi's groundbreaking idea, self-sacrifice, previously episodic, gained the status of an official military strategy. Onishi, however, took to a new level the practice of engaging enemy ships, which was already tacitly practiced by Japanese pilots. By 1944, Japan's Air Force was in a dismal state. There was a shortage of aircraft, fuel, and, above all, qualified pilots. While the United States had a well-established system for training reserve pilots, Japan had none. While Americans who distinguished themselves in air battles were immediately sent as instructors to training institutions, because of which, by the way, American aces cannot boast impressive results in the number of downed aircraft, Japanese pilots usually participated in battles until the very end, until they were killed. As a result, the cadre of pilots who had taken part at the beginning of the war had by then been virtually extinct. The result was a vicious circle. Inexperienced pilots became less and less effective and more often died. Thus, the prophecy of Admiral Yamamoto, who had fallen in battle by that time, came true. Back in 1941, one of the key organizers of the attack on Pearl Harbor warned that Japan was not ready for a prolonged war. In the chaos of war, desperate measures emerged. Japanese pilots, unable to hit American ships with bombs, resorted to the reckless tactic of aiming their planes directly at the enemy. The planes, dive-bombing the decks of the ships, were impossible to stop, as even severe damage could not prevent them from reaching their fatal goal. Admiral Onishi realized that such an initiative could be formalized. In addition, an airplane that crashed into the deck would be much more effective if packed with explosives. During the fierce battles in the Philippines on October 21, 1944, the first large-scale attacks by kamikaze planes were carried out. Several Allied ships were severely damaged in this operation, and the escort aircraft carrier St. Lo, hit by a single Zero, was completely destroyed. The stunning effectiveness of these initial kamikaze attacks prompted the Japanese command to expand this tactic, developed by Admiral Onogi, to other fronts of the war. Death is not the ultimate goal. 4 formidable kamikaze squadrons emerged in the harsh embrace of war. Asahi, like the rising sun; Shikishima, unshakable as an ancient fortress; Yamazakura, fragrant and fragile as a flower; and Yamato, unshakable as an ancient empire. As chosen volunteers, the pilots of these squads found the ultimate honor of giving their lives in a deadly dance in the heavens. As the fateful end approached, with Japan leaning towards surrender, the fates of these warriors became intertwined. Nearly every other surviving naval pilot took a vow to become a kamikaze. In the depths of historical annals, the term kamikaze has taken root, the ephemeral divine wind, a ferocious hurricane that mercilessly turned the enemy fleet to ashes in the 13th century. What would seem to be the relationship between the Middle Ages and this deadly concept? Despite the technological lag, the ideological foundation of the Japanese army was unshaken. According to ancient beliefs, the divine wind was sent by the goddess Amaterasu, the tireless protector of the Japanese islands. Her intervention came at the critical moment when the Mongol army led by Kublai Khan, numbering 300,000 warriors, threatened the integrity of the nation. Now, as war once again approached the sacred borders of the empire, the revitalized divine wind was embodied not in elemental force, but in selfless young men willing to lay down their lives for their homeland. The kamikaze became Japan's last hope, a force capable of reversing the inevitable American offensive and protecting the sacred Japanese islands. The outward elitism of the kamikaze mission hid a shocking truth. Their training was extremely poor. Unlike ordinary pilots, kamikazes received no additional training. Moreover, aspiring kamikaze pilots received even less quality training than regular pilots. They were not taught how to bomb or shoot, which allowed them to speed up the learning process. Japan's army leadership naively believed that mass kamikaze training would be a panacea for deterring the American offensive. Their mission, imbued with desperation, was a testament to the hopelessness of Japan's military situation. You can read a lot of strange information about kamikaze. Myth: kamikazes were not trained to land. Reality: landing training was mandatory because the first sortie had to end in a landing, not a self-destruction. Myth: kamikaze planes were often stripped of their landing gear. Reality: landing gear stripping was rare. Usually kamikazes used standard Zero fighters or other aircraft loaded with explosives without any landing gear modifications. Myth: if the kamikaze did not find a target, they had to self-destruct. Reality: if the kamikaze could not find a target, they could return to base and wait for the next mission. Some kamikazes flew multiple combat sorties and lived to see the end of the war. The first kamikaze attacks achieved their goal, causing terror among the crews of American ships. However, it soon became clear that ramming an enemy ship was not so easy, especially for inexperienced pilots. The kamikaze could not evade American fighters either. Having realized the low combat effectiveness of the suicide bombers, the Americans calmed down, while the Japanese command remained perplexed. In the meantime, an airplane had already been developed for the kamikaze, which, according to its creators, would be difficult for fighters to shoot down. The author of the idea, Mitsuo Ata, promoted the project even before the first suicide pilot squads were formed, which indicates that the idea of kamikaze was in the air at the time. The flying machine created by the Yokosuka firm based on this project was a human-controlled bomb rather than an airplane, a living rocket. While the MXY-7 Oka miniature airplane may have remotely resembled the German planning bomb developed in the run-up to defeat, it was actually a unique and innovative concept. The distinctive feature of the Oka was the use of a kamikaze as a pilot, unlike the radio-controlled German bomb. Moreover, the jet boosters installed provided the Oka with an unprecedented combination of maneuverability and speed, allowing it to reach an incredible threshold of almost 1,000 km/h as it approached its target. This invention thus challenged the prevailing paradigm, which believed that bombs were vulnerable to interception and anti-aircraft fire at high speed. During a period of intense research activity at military headquarters, concepts were advanced to expand the scope of kamikaze tactics. For example, human-controlled torpedoes and underwater mini-submarines were being developed. Torpedoes were to be launched at enemy ships and then crash into them themselves. Suicide pilot missions were planned to ram American bombers that were mercilessly bombing Japanese cities. For the first time, the concept of land kamikazes was introduced. These desperate fighters pushed carts filled with explosives in front of them. Their mission was to destroy Soviet tanks in the battles of 1945. The core of the kamikaze mission was to attack American aircraft carriers. The unusual cruise missile, equipped with an impressive ton of explosives, was designed not only to inflict devastating damage, but also to temporarily disable aircraft carriers, rendering them incapacitated. The Oka missile was carefully suspended beneath a twin-gen Betty bomber, whose mission was to get as close to the enemy fleet as possible. At a distance of about 30 kilometers, a kamikaze would make a daring transition from the bomber to the deadly Oka. The guided bomb was released from its carrier and rushed off on its intended course without haste. Using 3 solid-fuel rocket boosters, there was a short 10-second acceleration, allowing the kamikaze to get as close to the target as possible. The first combat use of the dive bomb airplanes turned into a bloodbath. However, the victims were not the crews of American ships, but Japanese pilots. The need to fly close to the target made the carrier planes extremely vulnerable. They were targeted by carrier deck fighters and were quickly shot down. In addition, advanced American radars unmistakably detected approaching enemy forces, whether they were kamikaze squads, aircraft carriers with dive bombers, conventional bombers, or torpedo carriers. Moreover, it turned out that a cruise missile equipped with rocket boosters lost maneuverability and lacked precision. A living torpedo. Kaiten, harsh Nipponese Hui Tian, literally translated as return to heaven. Also variants of translation, turning to heaven and changing destiny, are a weapon of the Imperial Japanese Navy in the last phase of World War II. In fact, they are huge torpedoes operated by kamikaze pilots. Compared to the standard Type 93 torpedoes, the self-guided Kaiten projectiles had undeniable advantages. Increased range, an impressive warhead, the ability to launch from depths inaccessible to periscope, and most importantly, the ability to be guided. However, in real combat conditions, the suicide bombers were not so effective. U.S. sources attribute the sinking of the tanker USS Mississinawa, which resulted in the deaths of 63 crew members, the LCI-600 small landing craft with 3 fatalities, and the escort destroyer USS Underhill, which claimed the lives of 113 servicemen. The cumulative casualties caused by the K-10s totaled 187. Human casualties among suicide pilots totaled 106, which included 15 deaths during the exercise and 2 self-destructs after the war. In addition, the crews of the 8 sunk submarine carriers died, totaling 846. The first mission of suicide pilots on K-10 was undertaken on November 20, 1944, against U.S. forces landing at Ulithi Atoll near the Philippines. The unit consisted of 2 submarines, I-37 and I-47, equipped with 8 K-10. Sekio Nishina, the co-author and inspirer of the project, was the pioneer who flew the K-10. In a fateful coincidence, Nishina took with him an urn containing the ashes of his deceased co-developer, Hiroshi Kuroki, who died during the test. The submarine I-47, having fired all 4 K-10, achieved the sinking of the American tanker USS Mississinawa, Category T3, displacement 26000 tons. In the ominous silence of the underwater depths, the fate of the I-37 took a tragic turn. Ships, guided by inexorable fate from the island of Leyte, caught up with the stealthy submarine. After a brutal collision with the destroyers USS Conklin and USS McCoy Reynolds, the I-37 shuddered as torpedoes exploded, dragging 117 brave crewmen to the sea floor. Their silent underwater raid ended in a tragedy forever engraved in the annals of naval history. At the height of World War II, saving Japan from imminent surrender rested on the desperate shoulders of kamikaze pilots. Despite the seeming insanity, brave volunteers flocked to special operations units right up to the point of defeat. Among these selfless warriors were not only inexperienced youths, but also battle-hardened pilots. Japanese naval aviators had already resigned themselves to the inevitable prospect of their own demise. While the American naval aviation had an established system of search and rescue of pilots by seaplanes and submarines, the Japanese, who were shot down, most often drowned with their planes. Second, Shintoism, the linchpin of Japanese religious and cultural identity, significantly influenced the perception of death. Its pantheistic nature connected kamikaze pilots to a host of divine ancestors, giving them hope of becoming part of an eternal cosmological order. Third, as Japan's imminent defeat approached, and in light of the prohibition against surrender under the military code of honor of Bushido, kamikaze pilots saw their missions as a last noble act to protect the honor and spirit of the nation. Undoubtedly, extremist views are pernicious. Nevertheless, kamikaze pilots participated in armed conflict and acted against enemy forces. This distinguishes them from modern suicide bombers, unjustifiably called kamikaze. And those who led the Japanese kamikazes were not cynics who cold-bloodedly dispose of other people's lives, not willing to sacrifice their own. Vice Admiral Takehiko Onishi, after the surrender of Japan, chose a way out, the name of which needs no translation from Japanese harakiri.